The Fox by D.H. Lawrence is a 1922 novella, set in England, like a good amount of D.H. Lawrence's books and works, and obviously, as I read more and more, I think this is only my second by him. Obviously, Lady Chatterley's Lover was my first, but yeah, they are, D.H. Lawrence had a complicated relationship with England as a whole. Like, he had, obviously during kind of Victorian, around a little bit post, going into modernity, you see kind of like a vague kind of, actually sometimes it's really on the nose, it's very overt, undisclosed contempt for, like, modernity and what it's done, in a way. Like, it's, like, brought about, like, like, in a way, it's, like, it's brought about, like, technology and industry, yet at the same time, it's also made people kind of numbed, and, you get the sense of, like, that, like, the use, especially with, like, the use of, like, child labor, too, like, that kind of disgusted him, in a way that's kind of a similarity with, like, William Blake, too, who was, like, a good active advocate of, anti-child labor laws, especially for his time, which is pretty telling, because that was, like, early 1800s. So yeah, there's with the Fox, it's about these two women named Blanche and Madford. Banford and March. I'm sorry, not Blanche. Banford and March. And they live on this farm in Berkshire, and it's during World War I, so it's like when all the men are gone, and they stay on that farm particularly for the reason that both of them can't find husbands, and they end up kind of devoting their life to toiling, tilling the field, and basically just kind of committing the rest of their lives, because they fear, because the fact that they are in their late 20s, which, today is, like, totally fine, because, like, so many people don't put such a stress and an emphasis on marriage, but, like, back then it was, like, yeah, if you, especially with, like, the life expectancy was, like, drastically different back then, too, even just, like, less than 100 years ago. I mean, this is, like, literally just over 100 years, so yeah, this is, just interesting, but yeah, there's a high standard for, them to, like, get married, or just and because they kind of just past that peak, like the slippery slope kind of thing, and it's like they kind of feel that at this point they're like, you know what, we don't need men, so they kind of, like, both throughout the rest of the novel are kind of hinted at, like, not, like, resenting men, but just kind of, like, being, like, skeptical, and, like, and just not really interested in, like, basically, the subject of, like, fertility and, like, matriarchal issues, as well as, like, addressed a lot throughout them, because they, March is basically, quite masculine in her features, which is interesting, kind of contrast to, Banford, who is shown as being really frail and skinny. So that kind of thing is, like, like, I guess on the farm, it's like certain things, like nurturing things, or like her nurturing kind of disposition is more, Banford's is more utilized for different aspect, or different kind of, facets of work, and maybe with, March's, more masculine kind of go-getter attitude, like, she's, like, more, yeah, like, there's different kind of utilities, I guess, in that sense, but they are both kind of, espouse and dispense with kind of this idea of, like, femininity. They're like, yeah, we don't need it, but even though they kind of, at some point, they can't live without it, so it's kind of an interesting thing, kind of like a philosophical thing of, like, it's almost like a Nietzschean kind of thing of, like, a rejection of values, or rather than maybe being more upfront with themselves and being like, maybe parts of them might be feminine or want to incorporate, rather than rejecting those values, they could incorporate them in, like, in individuation, maybe, but rather they end up kind of rejecting it wholesale, which I think is interesting. But anyway, so they end up kind of doing a good amount of work. They end up like, getting this this heifer, which is basically a, I didn't know this till today. It's basically a cow. It's a kind of cow that has a obviously it's like a cow, and it's, you know, it's basically before they calf, which means that when they have, I guess when it has kids, I guess, so that I guess it's more kind of valuable, which is again another thing, another parallel, because they're on the farm, they're kind of taking their job is to like take stock of literally of like their surroundings and like see that, okay, well, over here we have a calf that's about, you know, we have to make sure that this calf is actually kind of ready, or, you know, or sorry, the heifer is kind of used at its most, you know, selling, you know, get it at its most kind of fertility before it's sold. So I thought it's that's kind of interesting. And then so the namesake of the story, the fox, plays into it because it's basically this becomes an annoyance to them, because they both have disagreements on like what they should do with it. So like one of them thinks that the fox should be hunted and like turned and pilfered, I guess, and turned into a, you know, a kind of something or whatever. And then another one thinks that they can't, I think March can't find it within her to actually hunt the fox, despite being kind of the more, I guess, the more kind of tendacious of the two. So they basically end up having, being like enamored by this thing, and they end up, there's this other young man named Henry who's staying with them, and they basically have, again, another kind of parallel between the fox, the young, which is like young and this and that, and then the Henry, and the two of them. There's kind of like a vague love triangle, I guess, in a sense, but at the same time, I think with Henry, he's like the symbol of kind of youthful this and that, and there's still kind of like, maybe they see in him like maybe a bit of hope, because there's a lot of fascinating ideas here of parallels to like war too, like the fact that so many men, this is like a historical fact too, which is why D.H. Lawrence was like pretty much on the nose with this, or right on the ball with this kind of stuff too, is because he saw so many people leave, and obviously this was just like a few years, like World War I believe ended like 1918 or 1919. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, themes drawn to of like war, and like how war like robs and like pilfers people of masculinity in a way, and like how whole like villages and towns, like women had to kind of take over the factories. And I think this is back in the U.S. too. I believe there's like a lot of the women ended up being widowed by, you know, the wars, both wars, I believe, but more particularly, I think, First World War, and ended up having to like go on, you know, lonely lives without their husbands, and, you know, never knowing when they'd be coming back. And, you know, there's a whole element of that kind of like unknowingness, and like, you know, you see that with Virginia Woolf too, like the way she paints, you know, Septimus Warren Smith as being tortured, and like, you know, somebody just like otherwise very innocent, and just wanted to be you know, just to exist, and like, and being thrust into war, and like, you know, especially if you're drafted, is like, you know, a whole different issue. Or even like with Stoner by John Williams, I think with there's a similar thing with the feeling of guilt of not joining up, you know, and like knowing your place in history. Yeah, it's all very interesting stuff of how I think this plays a good part in Hermann Hesse's with the, I'd like to do this next, but Damien too, with like Damien having, you know, signing up and like kind of ending on that note of like him going off to battle as his friend Email, I think. Yeah. Watches with wonder, being like, oh, you know, like, I don't know, like, you know, it's kind of up in the air. Kind of have these things that are happening in the background, right, that are kind of determining, but at the same time, it's like that kind of universal stuff of history, of changing, and, you know, like, you know, Napoleon, you know, like that type of stuff. you know, like, all happens very unbeknownst in the moment. Like, we don't think too much about it. Like, we don't think right now that, you know, the world is just changing rapidly, and we have our little hovels in our little places and our little nests and stuff, and I'm nothing against that. I mean, we all have our small towns, and, like, you have to think locally in order to, like, think globally, to put it kind of comically a little bit. But yeah, it's true in a sense that when they there's another theme with D.H. Lawrence also talks about in Lady Chatterley's Lover with Mr. Chatterley, and how he was Clifford. Yeah, Clifford Chatterley was a indisposed, and, like, he wasn't able to have kids because of his being paralyzed, basically losing his legs. So you can imagine how much that, you know, like, that torture, like, the kind of this emasculation that war brings. Like, it's like, if it's not, like, something that, like, you know, like, just being dead, like, you're being brought, it's like, you know, like, is it being brought home like that and never being able to, like, you know, make love to your wife again and have kids with her. That's a whole different battle. So yeah, a lot to think about. This is The Fox. Definitely recommend it. Definitely going to read more D.H. Lawrence. I've heard he is a master novelist, also a poet who wrote, like, you know, polymath in general, like, philosopher, I think, too. Like, he had a good eye for philosophy. Greatly influenced by Nietzsche, too, I believe. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to read more of his long form stuff. Like, I think the Sisters is one of his, and I think The Rainbow is another one. So yeah, I'll keep you guys posted on that, and thanks for watching.